In order to keep the main thing in worship, I sometimes try to boil things down to their core essentials. With Christian worship, for example, I've often wondered, what are the ingredients that turn a Christian gathering into Christian worship? Or again, what distinguishes Christian worship from your generic run-of-the-mill deity, force, or big guy upstairs kind of worship? I believe that there are two things that make Christian worship distinctively Christian. The first is that it must be Trinitarian. Our talk, songs, and prayers of worship must be seasoned with this central tenet. The early believers and church fathers arrived at a Trinitarian understanding of God because they could not do otherwise. There was no other way to explain what they had witnessed and experienced. The Trinity is incomprehensible, inexplicable, and indispensable. And the very cool thing about it is that it places relationship at the very heart of the cosmos. A second essential is that Christian worship must be Christocentric, that is, centered on and facilitated by Jesus, who is the Christ. Jesus must be acknowledged as Lord and God, resurrected and victorious, and as the willing and sufficient ransom for sin. Christ-centered worship recognizes that it is Jesus himself who facilitates our entrance to and participation in the worship of God. In other words, Christ is our ticket to the celebration. So if that's what makes a gathering Christian, what transforms the Christian gathering into Christian worship? In other words, what's the difference between Christian worship and a Bible study potluck or a church softball game or a Christian mountain bike club? All good things. I believe it's focus, the focus of the gathering. Now, I'm not challenging the notion that in a broad sense, all of life is worship. I believe this, but for a Christian gathering to become Christian worship, the focal point can no longer be on the food or the game or the ride. The focus must be placed squarely upon the living God. Christian worship must also be wholehearted. Everybody knows half-hearted worship or half-hearted love is no love at all. It's simply not acceptable to show up and go through the motions. God demands and deserves wholehearted worship, worship that is costly. David, for example, refused to offer the Lord that which cost him nothing because he knew worship that costs nothing is worth nothing. Finally, Jesus commanded that we worship in spirit and truth. Now, you need to know that theologians translate and interpret the word spirit and truth in a few different ways, but I firmly believe this. In every way, spirit and truth should function together as tension and compression do, bringing balance and fusion to worship. Overemphasizing truth leads to legalism and routine, producing policy without power. Overemphasizing spirit can lead to license and excess, producing sensation without substance. These counterweights seem to help us maintain our equilibrium in worship. The essentials of Christian worship are simple, really. Christian worship must recognize God as triune and must center on the person and work of Jesus the Christ. Christian worship requires the full attention and costly intention of the worshiper. And finally, worship must take up residence at the crossroads of both spirit and truth. These essentials will keep the main thing, and will determine our actions to be both Christian and worship.